Over 3 million lives lost, a country divided, and a world watching in awe. Such was the magnitude of the Vietnam War. This conflict, stretching from 1955 to 1975, left an indelible impact on not just Vietnam, but the world at large. Both a symbol of Cold War tensions and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, this war has etched its mark on the annals of history. Join us as we delve into the intricate chronicles of the Vietnam War. The seeds of this devastating war were sown long before it officially began. Let's turn the pages of history back to the time of French colonization, when Vietnam was a part of French Indochina. The French ruled with an iron fist, imposing their culture and language, sowing the seeds of resentment among the Vietnamese. Then came the Second World War, and with it, Japanese occupation. The Vietnamese found themselves under the heel of another foreign power, further stoking the embers of discontent. Amidst this turmoil, a figure emerged from the shadows, Ho Chi Minh. He ignited the flame of Vietnamese nationalism, rallying his people with promises of freedom and self-determination. His voice echoed through the valleys and across the rice fields, resonating with those who yearned for independence. But as they say, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. As the winds of nationalism blew stronger, a storm was brewing on the horizon. The storm finally burst in 1955, marking the beginning of the Vietnam War. This wasn't a typical war, but a proxy war, a manifestation of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, with Vietnam as its battleground. Vietnam, once a unified nation, found itself divided at the 17th parallel into North and South, like a fabric torn apart. The North, under the leadership of the charismatic Ho Chi Minh, embraced communism, supported by the Soviet Union and China. The South, on the other hand, leaned towards capitalism, finding an ally in the United States. Between these two halves, a line was drawn, a line that would lead to a war lasting 2 decades. One cannot discuss the beginning of the Vietnam War without mentioning the Gulf of Tonkin incident. It was an encounter in 1964 when North Vietnamese forces allegedly attacked American naval vessels. Though its details remained clouded in controversy, it served as the catalyst for the United States to escalate its involvement in the war. The United States, fearing the domino effect of communism, committed itself to a war thousands of miles away from its shores. What started as a political commitment soon turned into a military one, with American boots on the ground, airstrikes and naval blockades. As the war escalated, so did its repercussions, shaking the world to its core. The war was far from a straight path, marked by significant turning points. As the conflict dragged on, several major events would shift the tides of the Vietnam War. Firstly, there was the Tet Offensive of 1968, a massive coordinated attack by Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces on more than 100 cities and towns in South Vietnam. Though the offensive was ultimately a military failure for the North, it struck a psychological blow to the US and South Vietnamese forces, shaking their confidence and dramatically shifting public opinion back home in the United States. Then came the My Lai massacre in March of 1968, a horrifying event where US soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians, including women, children, and the elderly. This incident further fueled anti-war sentiments and protests in the US, creating a domestic turning point in the perception of the war. These anti-war protests were not a minor footnote in the history of the Vietnam War. They were a significant factor that pressured the US government to seek a way out of the conflict. The collective voices of thousands of people marching in the streets, singing songs of peace, and demanding an end to the bloodshed, served as a powerful counterpoint to the ongoing war. Finally, the Paris Peace Accords of 1973 marked the official end of US involvement in the war. This agreement, however, did not bring immediate peace to Vietnam. It wasn't until 2 years later, in 1975, after the US had withdrawn its last troops, that the war truly ended with the fall of Saigon to North Vietnamese forces. In 1975, the echoes of war finally subsided, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The Vietnam War, a conflict marked by turning points, ended not with a grand victory or defeat, but with a silent, somber recognition of the human cost of war. The end of the war did not mean the end of suffering. The Vietnam War concluded, but the echoes of its tumultuous past reverberated long after the last gunshot had faded. The immediate aftermath saw the reunification of Vietnam under a communist regime, a symbol of the country's struggle and defiance. But this unity came at a high cost. The war had torn apart the fabric of Vietnam, and mending it was no easy task. The country was left in ruins, its cities and villages ravaged by the relentless conflict. The economy was on its knees, and the people grappled with the harsh realities of post-war life. Amidst this turmoil, a new crisis unfolded: the boat people. Thousands of Vietnamese, desperate to escape the oppressive regime and the dire situation, took to the sea in rickety boats, risking their lives in hopes of finding refuge abroad. Their plight added another layer of sorrow to the already grim narrative of the Vietnam War. Yet, the aftermath of the war wasn't confined to Vietnam alone. Its ripples were felt globally, especially by the veterans who had fought in the war. They returned home, their spirits scarred by the horrors they had witnessed and the atrocities they had been a part of. Post-traumatic stress disorder became a common affliction among veterans, a silent battle they fought long after the war had ended. The Vietnamese people, too, bore the brunt of the war's long-term effects. Decades later, they continue to grapple with the physical and psychological scars left by the conflict. Landmines and unexploded ordnance still plague the country, a lethal legacy of the war. The Vietnam War, a dark chapter in history, serves as a stark reminder of the horrors of war and the resilience of the human spirit. It is a testament to the indomitable will of the people who endured it, a monument to their courage and a cautionary tale for the world.